Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Croccast podcast. I'm your host, Nate, along with my co-host, Matt.
Hey,
And today we're joined by Mr. Andy Vick. Andy, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Pleasure to be here, guys.
awesome.
So I know Andy from my former job at the laboratory where he still are the regional manager of several different laboratories, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, I was, and there's just been a transition fairly recently, but I was a corporate vice president of our safety assessment business at Charles River, overseeing all of our Midwest sites, which were, goodness, five sites and close to 3,500 employees, but have just transitioned into our commercial business as a global account manager. So that's new change, but new challenges and new journey. So I'm excited.
Yeah. So I met Andy via the Mold Brothers, Micah and Josiah. And you're actually the guy that got my Dominican Red Mountain boas from.
That's right.
So kind of eternally grateful to him for that. So you want to give us a little bit of background about how you first got into reptiles and like what all you do with them at the moment?
Sure, I could go on for a while on that topic. So
Go
stop
for it.
me when I get a little too deep into it, and otherwise I might go for an hour on that question alone. But in terms of what got me into the hobby, I tell you, it's about as early as I can remember, and I've been a hobbyist for at least 35 years. I celebrated the big 50 in July this year, and so actually 35 years is probably almost like 40. And and I've had just a fascination with reptiles since as early as I can remember, and I was probably satisfied with kind of finding them under a rock or under a log or something like that out in the woods when I was the earlier than 10. But then that kind of interest at the 10 to 15 kind of started to turn into wanting to maybe keep one of them as a pet. And I just remember being just fascinated and still am just about how well adapted they are to their environment. They're kind of really masters of adaptation, even on an evolutionary standpoint, and even just built to perfection. And when you think about even some species of reptiles and how really little they've changed in thousands of years, tens of thousands of years of um, of existence, I mean that really just kind of speaks to how well engineered, how perfectly designed they are for success in some of the uh, you know, for uh, for survival and even thriving in their environments and some of the harshest environments, that are on the planet. So again, that interest and just kind of really the awe and fascination and them as a species, really across the whole all members of the reptile family just took off, and that wasn't enough. Had to needed to own one, and I still remember. Technically my first reptile pet was a boa constrictor that was probably about 6 or 7 foot long. It was only a pet for about 24 hours because, like probably most young boys, they love reptiles, but sometimes their mothers do not. And so I remember, this was dropped off at a pet store where I was frequenting. I mean, I was probably at this pet store every day, seeing what was new in the pet store, and they had a drop off of a snake. And then next thing I knew, I was asking the store manager, any chance I could adopt the snake? Yes. The snake was coming home with me, and I think when my mother realized that night there were some tears, there was some screaming, and the snake was going back to the pet store for the next morning. And as any good hobbyist, you know, challenges like that don't stop us. It's not for the faint of heart. And so that just kind of almost made my interest in keeping a reptile as a pet even greater. And I think within even a couple of months, I was back out at it again. And I think my second attempt was a couple of ball pythons. At this point, I think my parents might have even admitted defeat and realized that my interest and my passion for the hobby was going to be greater than their concern of then and let's admit it, in most cases it's just kind of an irrational fear. And so to attest as a testament to my parents, and they probably need celebrated. We ought to just take a moment to acknowledge all of the parents who probably had zero interest in reptiles, but yet they knew that their sons and their daughters were passionate about it, and so they kind of put their own opinions on the sidelines, and they put them on hold to support, our interests. So I certainly give credit to my parents for allowing me to do that. And it didn't take long for my bedroom to even turn into a bit of a mini zoo. I mean, I even started with different monitor species, different snakes, mostly as I recall, probably ball pythons, Burmese pythons, and frankly, just as the older I got, to kind of go fast forward quite a bit, the older I got, frankly, the more interested in the hobby I got, and the more income I made, the bigger the hobby got as well. It still is a hobby, but it's I think it's an increasingly sophisticated hobby because my knowledge of the animals just continues to grow. I'm a a forever student, always trying to hone our craft, and I really take great pride in providing captive husbandry that is second to none. And I think that as a result, it's translated though to having very healthy animals that I can enjoy, that others can enjoy, and that's been a blessing. But a lot of things in between that I can certainly expand on. I'm, uh, even my interest, my career is quite animal related. I finished my bachelor's degree in zoology and my PhD in pharmaceutical chemistry, and we might even circle back to the one time in my career where my interest in reptiles and my uh, interest in pharmaceutical drug development merged with I was part of one of the scientists and contributing scientists in the discovery and the development of exenatide, which many of you might recognize as a peptide that was identified in the saliva of a Gila monster and is one of the most potent treatments for type 2 diabetes that's on the market.
Really?
So I'll bore you with that maybe later on in the podcast.
Yeah.
But back to you for extra questions, Nate.
Well,
Uh,
I was just gonna mention real quick, going off what you're saying about parents and all that stuff. So one thing that I think is interesting between me and Nate is I'm more interested in like the research aspect of reptiles, and he's really
Sure.
into the hobby and stuff. And we have interest in both as well, but like those are expertises and stuff. And so my first two like major reptiles I had were much later in life because growing up, I always, my parents didn't like reptiles either. Well, mostly my mom. And so I'd go out and catch reptiles, keep them for a week or two, then let them go. So I didn't really like get like a pet till much later. In the first two major ones I had, I got a ball python, and someone told me that their cousin had it and they were trying to get rid of it and stuff. And so I went without telling my mom or anything. I went and talked to them. They gave it to me, tank and everything, brought it home. And then one day I just brought it downstairs and my mom freaked out, of course. And at that point I had it. So, so she didn't do anything about it. And then the second one was my professor gave me a tegu.
Yep.
And I had it for probably about 9 months before my mom even knew I had it. I kept it in my closet, my room. It was a large enough space and everything. I had everything figured out, but I had it for 9 months. My mom had no idea I had it. And then I ended up, I moved down to Florida, so I had to get rid of it. I actually gave it to Nate.
Yep.
But I had to drop it off at a professor's place so that Nate could go get it because I wasn't going to go all the way up to Ohio and everything. So I dropped it off there. So in order to do that, I went downstairs to my mom because she was going to drive up with me and everything to go up there. And I was like, by the way, this is also going to be a passenger with us. And I showed her a picture of the tegu I had in my closet. She's like, what the? You have an alligator in your room? And I was like, no, it's just a tegu and stuff. But it was pretty funny. So I had it for 9 months. She had no idea I had it until I ended up giving it away. So
yeah, and it's even hearing you describe that, I think it's it's a good clarification because I say, I think at 10 or 11 or 12 years old, yeah, I've probably in my mind I was probably thinking, pet, but I definitely over the last 35, 40 years, it's really more the research side,
Yeah.
the husbandry side, the conservationalist side, the education side, particularly trying to, because it's interesting, even in some of the reptile education I've done, young kids are rarely, if ever, afraid of snakes and lizards. It's only uh, as they gain a little bit of age, as they get a little bit older, and so that's just kind of even a reminder that fear is probably a learned behavior. It's certainly not innate, because some kids, even young kids, 4 or 5 years old, they have, I think, a respect for reptiles, but not a fear of. But yeah, so pet, I probably used pet, but I don't know in my lifetime of kind of being involved in the hobby and even the
Mhm.
discipline that I've ever had a name for one of my animals that was different than what they're usually referred to as their genus, species, and
Yeah.
maybe their common
Yeah.
name at most. So there's never been a Teddy or a Fluffy or anything like that. But yes, I definitely enjoy the research more, like you mentioned, Matt.
Well, and I think actually my mom, being apprehensive actually kind of helped that, because I've always been kind of that way minded, but
Hmm.
because of her not really letting me have pets and forcing me to go out and catching them and keeping them for a few months and letting them go and stuff, I really enjoyed observing their behavior and stuff, which kind of helped cultivate that. So it
Yeah,
was, it probably had the opposite effect of what you wanted it to have, but it actually turned out to be a good thing. So it's good.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. So earlier you mentioned you have um, Brazilian rainbow boas and some rhino rat snakes. So what are some of the other stuff that you have in your collection?
Yeah, so my current collection is a little bit ADHD. I'm trying to kind of, even at this stage of my career, this stage of my life, and certainly as it relates to this hobby, I'm even kind of finding myself doing a little soul searching and kind of zeroing in maybe on some species that I enjoy the most, maybe that my setup is the most conducive to providing high quality husbandry for. But so that's still a development process. But right now I have um, a great collection with a mix of old world rat snakes. My friend Matt Most, that many of you probably know out of the Indianapolis area, definitely turned me on to old world rat snakes. So I have some Thai bamboo rat snakes, some mandarin rat snakes, Mollendorfs. I have some rhino rat snakes. A lot of that is even Matt's bloodline, maybe some Zirkel bloodline sprinkled into that mix. And then in addition, a lot of just kind of a little bit more unusual mid-sized constrictors. One thing, it's a bit of an arbitrary rule, but my mother disliked reptiles and still does, and my wife, who I've been married to for 28 years, has carried on that disdain for reptiles. So out of respect for her, I try not to keep anything in the ginormous scale, so kind of at a 6 foot max. But I've really enjoyed like those mid-sized constrictors, like the Australian Woma pythons. I do have a group of Colombian rainbow boas, Brazilian rainbow boas. I have a pair of diamond pythons, a few other odds and ends that are just kind of good species for education as well, like Mexican black kings, some corn snake morphs, a couple of scaleless rats, and some Texas rat snakes, and a pair of Ackies. That was kind of my return to monitors, some of the dwarf monitors. So the Varanus have been added back to the list. There's probably a few others that I'm missing, but that hits most of the collection.
Yeah, I've kind of noticed, been doing a little bit of the same thing with my like mid-sized constrictors, and I guess you could classify scrub pythons as a bit larger than
Mm-hmm.
mid-size, at least in
Mm-hmm.
full grown.
Yeah,
But I mean, mine now are probably about 5 foot long at the moment.
yeah,
But uh, I just found that Australasian pythons have always been kind of the group of snakes that interested me the most.
Mm.
But now Micah's been kind of dragging me into neotropical boas. So
My go ahead, Nate. Sorry.
so yeah, I guess my field's been expanding a little bit in that regard.
My particular interests, favorites, are monitor lizards. Those are my absolute favorite. So it's cool to hear you have Ackies. What do you think of those? How do you like them?
I've loved them. I've said I'm a big fan of, I mean, pretty much the whole genus Phronidae. I'm a huge monitor lover, but the Ackies kind of come in a size that's more conducive for
Right.
the facility that I have. But they're a great personality. Just I've really enjoyed them. Again, with my job and with my travel, um, I fare a little bit better with snakes. I guess the one good thing that COVID has caused is it's had my travel reduced quite a bit. So snakes generally uh, fit a little bit more flexibly into my collection just because of my travel. Whereas the one drawback with the Ackies is they're I'm feeding them mostly dubia roaches and some other insects, an occasional pinky about every other day. So with my travel being shut down largely because of the pandemic, that has been a good thing. When my travel kicks back up, I'll have to try to sweet talk my wife into helping out with their feeding, which you
How,
can imagine how well that'll go.
yeah, exactly. How are they like handling wise?
They, they handle quite well. I've had two pair, and of the four, there was only one female that would again, she wasn't. They're not real hyperactive at all. I think all four are fairly calm. They don't necessarily have that typical monitor behavior where they're trying to beat you with their tail or wrap your arms up in a bear hug and leave a few scratches as a present. So they're much more laid back than that. Out of the four, like I said, only one female had a little bit of a habit that if you weren't, paying a bit of attention, she would just kind of turn her head to the side and give you a bite on a thumb or a finger, whatever digit was closest. And that was pretty unusual because all of the other three, even with limited handling, they still just would they would socialize well, and you could scoop them up out of the cage without any obvious stress to them or any stress to me as the handler. So they've been great.
Awesome. What is your Woma python?
Yes,
So I've seen those and stuff, but I don't really know much about them. Just kind of what are they like?
yeah, they're actually probably one of my favorites as well. They're
Yeah.
Australian species, obviously one of the few species that doesn't have the heat sensing pits, and that's just something that's kind of again sometimes those little things that stand out, kind of probably compared to like a chondros or something that would have just big pits. The womas have none, and it makes sense. It's just again it's a nuance of their adaptation. Their primary diet and from where they're originally from is probably bearded dragons and other lizards, and so
Mm.
there's really never a reason to develop that as a physical trait. But they're a great species. I think good size. I think my male is probably 4 feet. My female is pushing 6 feet, so they're reasonable size. I think they do very well in captive environment. A little bit more. I keep them in about a 6 foot cage, with an aspen cypress blend substrate, water bowl hide. They're great feeding response. Again, they feed a little bit more on motion. So
Mm.
sometimes just the flip of a rodent, they turn on to rodents very easy, even as babies. I think the blackheads sometimes, I understand. I haven't worked with them, but they can be a little bit trickier to get start eating. The womas, in my experience, I've had a couple of clutch of woma babies. They're quite hardy eaters, and they'll take rodents. Even I don't know that I had to do any kind of lizard scenting. They just took rodents quite easily, and a lot of that was just motion activated. But they've been one of my favorite. The pattern is absolutely gorgeous. You could just imagine they blend in perfectly in their natural setting in the outback of Australia. So I have a pair of them that are probably in their geriatric phase. They are probably 20, they're probably pushing 25 years. So they've been a long-term pair that I've had. And then I have maybe a 2-year-old female that I just kind of brought into the collection. Someone was letting her go and I had a sweet spot for it.
Now they're kind of shaped a little funny. Is that for burrowing in the sand? Do you know?
That is a good question. Not, I don't have an answer to that. I mean, I guess I have almost gotten used to their
Yeah.
kind of their body type that I don't know that I noticed, but you're right. They don't have much, like some constrictors, even some, boas and pythons will have a little bit more, we'll just kind of call it a little bit more triangulation to the head where,
Yeah.
and the womas don't. So I certainly suspect that that's probably an adaptation to, if not some burrowing, just from life in a sandy environment. So
Yeah.
So you mentioned rhino rat snakes. From what I understand, those are primarily piscivorous, correct?
yeah, say that one more time.
From what I understand, they're primarily piscivorous, correct?
Yes.
Fish eaters. So
Yeah.
how's that
as
factor in with captive husbandry and all that?
so that yeah, great question. I think um, the rhino rat snakes, I think that they have been one of those species that maybe individuals that have considered them have maybe been turned off for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons might be price, and that still might be the reason. But the other reason is also just they have kind of a reputation of being a difficult baby to get started eating. And I don't know that has not been my experience, and probably I'll. Oh, no problem. I will probably have give a little bit of credit to Matt Most because he's also taught me a bit about making sure how to successfully feed the babies. But and that is they as babies they rarely will eat directly pinky mice. Every once in a while, maybe you have 1 out of 10 rhino rat snake babies that will accept a pinky mouse as their first meal. And so what I'll generally do, again, a basic setup for a rhino rat snake baby is maybe a 6-quart rack with a little sphagnum moss, a little hide, and maybe like a 12-ounce or 16-ounce deli cup. And so I'll start feeding them by introducing a few rosy reds or little minnows. And um, I know there's always some concern about that. And some of the, I think it's the thiamine, if I'm not mistaken, that can um, that can almost produce a little bit of a toxicity chronically to the rat snakes. But in terms of getting some first meals into them, those rosy reds I think work perfectly. And then what I'll do after I just do a couple of meals of rosy reds is I'll just introduce a frozen thawed pinky right into that same deli cup with the rosy reds and just maybe it's just the motion of the rosy reds and they're creating a little bit of of movement of the pinky in the water. More often than not, that transition from rosy red to pinky by using that technique over the course of 3 or 4 weeks, it works beautifully. Like I said, every once in a while, they'll take pinkies right out of the gate. But with my babies, and if I have the time and I do just a real slight kind of tease feed or an assist feed, I can get that transition happening even a bit more quickly. But if you've got 12, 14, 16 rhino rat snake babies, that's a lot of extra time that you sometimes don't always have. So the rosy red with the pinkies in the water over a few weeks, next thing you know it, they're eating entirely pinkies. Now it is interesting though, because that is a very aquatic species, much more than you would imagine based on the body type of that snake. You would think this snake is built for the life in the trees, completely arboreal. But I will say, my rhino rat snakes, they're spending at least 50% of their time in a water bowl. And so I always give them a container that is large enough for them to completely submerge. And some of them, I'll say, and it may even be related to that early feeding, the feeding kind of scenario that I just described. Even as adults, they'll sometimes prefer to feed in an aquatic environment. I even have had on occasion a couple of adults that they'll only take a rodent prey when they're in the water. And if they're in the terrestrial side, or the if they're on the substrate side and you introduce that same prey, disinterest. But if they're bathing in their water container, game on, feed me, and feed me another one if you have time. So they really retain a lot of aquatic tendencies even as adults.
So, pertaining to the water bowl size, like how big do these snakes get? So, like, give an idea of how big a water bowl for them should
Yeah.
be.
Yep, absolutely. So as I was mentioning, for the babies, I'll use like a little 12-ounce deli cup, and that's plenty. Even by the time they're a year or so, which is usually when they're going through their color transition, kind of from that grayish brown to the green. We're still talking about like a sandwich sized deli cup, something you might be able to fit your PB&J sandwich. And even for an adult, I'm still using like a 6-quart tub as um, their water environment, and that's plenty to fit even adult, or if it's breeding time, even both a male and female can crawl in there. A big rhino rat snake is probably um, I think I've got some 4 and 5 footers, but kind of built quite like a corn snake in terms of overall length and diameter. So they're not that there's not that much body to them. So yeah, like a 6-quart tub, even for adult, is perfect for soaking in. No reason you couldn't go bigger though. They'd enjoy it.
What's your favorite reptile? Well, first off, are snakes? Are you more of like a snake guy? I'm assuming, just based on our conversation.
Only yeah, that's interesting. I would say equally lizard and snake guy. I'm fascinated on both sides of that spectrum
Yeah,
because of my schedule and what is most conducive to
snakes are.
my schedule and my ability to provide, appropriate care and husbandry. I've kind of drifted towards snakes just because of their feeding frequency, and sometimes their cage cleaning is a little less frequent than obviously some lizards that might be daily feeders to every other day feeders.
So, what's your favorite species between snakes and lizards?
Oh boy. That definitely on the lizard side, I've already mentioned I've got definitely a sweet spot for Varanus, and even the Ackies are right up there. I mean, I've really enjoyed them. But yeah, they've been a blast. And on the snake side, rhino rat snake, the old world rat snakes, definitely. Rhino rat snakes are up there. Um, let me think. Yeah, rhino rat snakes are probably right up there, but like even those Mollendorfs, the flower horns, hunter flower horns are awesome. The cockeye are awesome, but yeah, at the top of the list, at least from a colubrid standpoint, probably be rhino, and from a constrictor standpoint, would probably be might even be the Brazilian rainbow boas. They might be one notch higher than the womas,
The
even though I've been bit by them more often.
Um, are you sure it's not a Dominican red mountain boas? Because even after you get
It,
rid of them, you seem to keep getting them.
they were definitely up there, and that was just kind of one of those things where I had a pair of the red phase. And when they say red phase, these were really rich red. And I think you guys even had Paul Bodnar on
Yeah.
earlier, and those were, I'll definitely acknowledge Paul, those were his babies, and great, great rich red, big female. I mean, I'm guessing Nate, she was pushing at least 5.5, maybe even 6 foot, probably bigger now, and definitely bigger than the male counterpart. But he was still every bit of 4 feet. Just gorgeous snakes, but a direction that I didn't know that I was going to go, and I knew Nate well enough to know that he would give them high class care and maybe even be successful at their captive breeding. So, but
Would you
they are gorgeous.
would so obviously you mentioned that you don't have like a ton of time to, but would you ever be interested in doing hots at all?
I think probably the short answer would be yes, if my irrational brain was allowed to operate without any kind of intervention. But I honestly just think, and I have kind of dabbled with it. I think even on the bucket list of hot would probably be even something like just good old Keystrodon contortrix, just a copperhead,
Yeah.
and
That's
but I don't know that I would do that. And in even that, there's probably a few reasons. One, I already mentioned I've been married for 28 years, and I'd like to still stay married. And the only way I'd be able to do that is to outright lie, and that's not good, a good pattern for successful marriage. So
yeah.
so I wouldn't even ask, because she would definitely not be in favor of bringing venomous in the house. And the closest thing I have been able to get to that, and it adds to my list, I just forgot about, and they're right up there on the pecking order, and that's false water cobra. I haven't decided if I love them or hate them, but I have a trio of false water cobras, and then I do love Barons. I've got a pair of Barons racers, the Baron Eye, and I'm adding to the list, and a pair of yellowtail Crebos, which I now you probably think I was drunk earlier in the show, because the yellowtail Crebos are amongst my favorite, and that's and the Baron Eye and the false water cobra and the yellowtail Crebos. I was turned on to all of those. Those are Zach. Oh, and Zach's going to hate me if he ever listens to this. I believe his last name is Lohman. He is a professor at university in West Virginia, and one of the most knowledgeable guys you could ever meet. So I'll beg for forgiveness for Zach for forgetting his last name, but I can provide you his contact, because he would make an excellent future
Oh, definitely.
future podcast
Yeah,
For
guest.
sure.
yeah. Send it to me after the show.
Sure.
I'll write it down.
But yeah, yellowtail. Yeah, now you got me.
Yeah.
I must have been sleeping. Yeah, they're pretty awesome.
That's the copperheads are what I would actually, we get a lot of those where I live growing up, and so I would actually catch them and keep them for a little bit. Those were one of the ones, and my mom didn't like that at all, but I always, whenever that happened, that's when I started moving them from my garage up into my room, so that way she wouldn't see them and stuff, and let those go. But I did copperhead research with Eastern Kentucky University, so
Oh, did you?
they're one of, yeah, it was a lot of fun. They're one of my favorite uh, snakes, honestly.
Yeah,
I really like them. They're beautiful and stuff. I actually got to see, while I was there too, I actually got to see, this wasn't a wild one, it was a captive one, but I got to see it give birth, which was
oh
really
my.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah, they were pretty common, and we lived in the St. Louis area, St. Louis, Missouri area for about 6 years, and they were quite common
Yeah.
in that zip code. I guess you brought me back, because I got distracted. Like I was starting to think of yellowtail Crebos like squirrels. I had the squirrel effect. But in addition to preserving my marriage, the other thing that scares me about venomous is frankly just me, because even though I've been doing this for 35 years, I'm still and I've got great facility that is escape proof. It is I use a lot of automation and my facility as well, but it's not idiot proof.
Yeah.
And so I still, there's that moment where maybe I forgot to slide a rack in completely, or maybe I just, got distracted by a false water cobra, and I still get bit on occasion.
Yeah.
And for venomous, that's both of those things don't fly very well when you're considering venomous. So for my own,
Absolutely.
because I know me well enough, I know that I just don't know that unless I went with something fairly impotent in terms of venom potency, I don't know that I'd even experiment with it, because it wouldn't be if I got bit, it would just be when. And
Yeah.
that's I'm getting, I'm 50 years old. I'm thinking about grandkids. So
Would you be interested at all in like a Gila monster or a beaded lizard?
now that, yes. And they have been kicked around. I've even come close to those on occasion. Um, and so that I might consider, particularly again, if I knew my travel situation
Yeah.
was not, maybe like when I'm pre-retired and I'm not traveling, and I know that I could provide proper care and husbandry for some lizard species. Again, that would definitely be an option.
That's something
Yeah,
that's on
but
my list. I really want one.
yeah, same here. And they're still legal in Ohio without a permit, right?
I believe that's the case. Now, like I
It's like
said,
it's
Matt,
it's so weird in
having
Ohio.
they've often said, and I can completely understand why, that the false water cobras kind of make perfect training species if you're considering that transition to venomous,
Yeah.
and they are properly neurotic, and so I can and unpredictable. The only thing predictable about them is they want to they're so food motivated that they just kind of charge every time I open the rack, even a couple of inches. I mean, at least two of my three false water cobras, they throw 2/3 of their body out of the enclosure ready for a meal. And I think if you ask Micah Mold about that as well, who
Yeah.
you've mentioned a couple times, he is also undecided. It's kind of a love-hate relationship with false water cobra. So
Yeah, I've seen his water cobras. They're like you said, neurotic.
they are, but
But
feeding machines. I mean, they're a little bit of a high metabolism species, ideally being fed more like every 5 days. Not huge meals though, but they pass food through their system in no time. So they're just thinking about, maybe two things, and that's feeding and hopefully breeding one of these days.
yeah, but circling back to the helodermas,
Hmm.
from my personal experience working at the Bob Jones Serpentarium with the
Hmm.
collection of Gila monsters and beetle lizards they have there, they're actually a surprisingly low maintenance species. It's almost
Yeah,
like a once a week, almost like a snake like
yeah.
husbandry schedule for them. So that's kind of what's interesting me. Is just because, I mean, I don't know. I think they're a cool lizard and they don't require all the upkeep of like a monitor would
They're
require.
gorgeous.
Yeah.
So you've brought me back to Gila Monster, so I'll talk a little bit about exenatide. So
Yeah, I
yeah,
was
and
actually so I started doing kayak tours on the side.
yeah,
And I actually was just talking about this too because when they hear that I work with I do herpetology and stuff, they get all excited and ask all questions and stuff. And I was actually just talking to someone about this, about the diabetes medication made from the Gila Monster.
sure.
I'm actually super interested in this.
Yeah, I will. Again, I'll try to keep it concise because I could definitely even talk about this for quite some time. But it is, and I'll even start by saying that this whole space, and we'll just call it pharmacognosy, which is the study of natural products for its medicinal benefit. It's almost like fashion. It's pharmacognosy kind of comes in and out of fashion in the industry, but the cool thing is it's very much back in fashion. And I'm a believer that I feel like just God gave us all of the things we need just right there in nature. And so when we get scientists and chemists and biochemists starting to really tease beneath the surface of nature as a resource for medicine, I think that's just how it was intended. And so, sorry for that digression, but I think then when you
Right.
consider, so what they, and this is a little bit history, and my memory probably isn't great, but it'll be close enough to recall the highlights. So researchers had realized that the Gila monster, its venom, and most venom is a cocktail of peptides and proteins. But then in that cocktail of the venom of the Gila monster, basically the saliva of the Gila monster, they identified a peptide called exendin, I think exenatide. And the what the researchers realized when they basically isolated that peptide, they realized that it had a high degree of homology. I think on the order of 70 to 80% to a human peptide called glucagon-like peptide. And
Wow.
glucagon-like peptide is a very potent um, glucose regulator that has efficacy for particularly type 2 diabetes. Not necessarily type 1, but definitely type 2 diabetes. And the problem with glucagon-like peptide, though, is it's very, as a peptide, it's very proteolytically unstable. And so in circulation, it probably has a biologic half-life of literally minutes, which really limits its clinical use and its commercialization. Because a peptide like that would almost the only way that you could really uh, dose that kind of peptide for, you'd almost have to administer it by a pump or a constant infusion so that you could maintain therapeutic drug levels. So anyway, they found this exendin, and it had a high degree of homology um, to this human glucagon-like peptide, but it was quite a bit more stable. So there was just enough amino acid differences, and the nature of those amino acids conferred much improved stability of that peptide, and equally potent, if not even greater potency in terms of glycemic control and improvement of HbA1c, which is kind of the critical endpoint for type 2 diabetes management. So researchers, and this was kind of a joint venture, frankly, between Amylin Pharmaceuticals and Eli Lilly and Company, which is where I worked for about 8 years. And they jointly developed that product as a twice a day um, uh, therapeutic. So instead of having to administer it continuously as a pump, which might not have even been viable at this point, they were able to administer it twice a day as a subcutaneous injection. Its commercial name is called Byetta. I think Byetta, and it's been really a very successful commercial product for Lilly, and most importantly, it's been it has changed the lives of a lot of type 2 diabetic patients around the world, and in the millions. To add to that story even a little bit more, so even that is still, though, just a twice a day. It still requires 2 injections a day, usually around mealtime for glucose control. And so if you're a diabetic and you don't particularly like needles, the holy grail was maybe something even less frequent, maybe even once a week. So myself and 2 other individuals at Eli Lilly, Wolfgang Glazner and Richard DeMarchi, we basically, through a proprietary linker, connected that, an exendin-like peptide to the FC region of an antibody, of an IgG, so the trunk of that kind of Y-shaped antibody, and basically extended the time action of even that BID product to a once a week product. So instead of 14 to 21 injections, patients are now only having to take 1 injection a week, and that product is called dulaglutide or Trulicity. You might even see Trulicity
Yeah.
on the TV from time to time, and I was one of the 3 inventors of that product, and that even has a little bit of, let's just say, that brings us all the way back circular to Heloderm lizard spit. So one of the numerous medical advancements that we've seen, not only from natural products, but even specifically in venom. I think researchers continue to evaluate venom for stroke, ischemia, pain management, and a lot of different therapeutic benefits. So I'm a big advocate for hoping that we continue to do that.
Yeah,
So
last guest we had on, Dr. Kent Blight, University of Florida, he was doing a lot of research with peptides in crocodilian
Oh,
immune
great.
systems.
I had no
And
idea. Okay.
yeah, so if Charles River wants to ever start like a crocodilian blood bank, I'm ready to receive funding.
I'm ready to. I'll be right there with you, Nate. We'll do it together. That does sound awesome. I bet we could recruit a couple of mold boys too. So
Yeah, yeah. Mike would be like, "Okay, we need more lace. No specific reason. We just need them."
yeah, I mean, you think about it. I mean, I think sometimes our egos as humans get in the way, and we really think that we understand more about our world and more about the natural environment than we do. We're still just scratching the
Oh, for
surface.
sure.
It's pretty cool. If I had it to do all over again, I'd probably be in a natural products lab somewhere.
There's some guy that developed a bunch of medications just by he spent months, probably a couple of years, in the woods just watching apes and
Yep.
seeing what they do to, like when they get a stomachache, what they do and stuff. Would pick that stuff, figure out what was working, why it was working, and then developed a bunch of medication just from doing that. And
Makes
crazy.
perfect sense.
So the last guy we had on, I asked him this question. He didn't really know exactly, so maybe you'll know more. I had heard, and this might be more of a I heard this on a documentary, and they might have been more embellishing more on it, but
Mhm.
it was talking about that they're researching taking an enzyme that exists in Gila monsters. So like Gila monsters, in the wild, they don't get to eat a lot because they're in the desert. So they have an enzyme that helps regulate their insulin and stuff, I guess.
Yeah.
And so they were talking about taking that enzyme and somehow inserting it into humans so that they wouldn't need medication. They could take that and they'd be able to regulate their insulin properly. Have you heard anything about that?
I haven't, but it's almost an identical storyline as the discovery and development of exenatide,
Okay.
which was a peptide from the same species and has a lot of the same anti-diabetic efficacy. So the notion that you're describing of researchers to kind of go back to that venom cocktail of a Gila monster to see if there's still some peptides, proteins, enzymes, or other constituents that might have pharmaceutical value. That doesn't shock me at all. I mean, it seems like it would be a gold mine opportunity. So I'm not myself specifically aware of that particular research, but it seems it seems very plausible to me.
Yeah, cool.
Because you're right, that was even the same with some. I remember some of that same aspect of some of the discovery of exenatide. It was really related to the fact that the Gila monster will often go off food for months and months at a time. And when you consider it, even from a glycemic standpoint, their first meal of a season, which they're probably packing down a pretty good meal, they're having a huge secretion in insulin and glucose, so they need a very potent peptides or proteins to regulate that. So it was a similar school of thought of what you just described.
Cool. Yeah. That's one thing that fascinates me so much is that's actually one of the things that really launched me into the research aspect. Like I knew I wanted to work with reptiles and stuff, but I watched a documentary all about venom and how it helps with medical research, all that stuff, and I thought that was so cool. And so I wanted to go into research. That's initially what I wanted to do, but now I've wanted to go more into like the conservation aspect and stuff. But
Yeah,
mainly,
the
sorry,
research. Sorry for jumping in there.
no, go ahead.
I mean, there is a huge opportunity because even when you consider what we know about um, treating diseases in reptiles, it's still pretty limited. And we don't even really understand. That's kind of even part of my training as a pharmaceutical scientist. My specialty was kind of pharmacokinetics and kind of the ADME properties of a drug, and so how it's absorbed, how it's distributed, how it's metabolized, and how it's excreted. So if you consider pharmacology as being kind of that study of what a pharmaceutical drug is doing to the body of an organism, pharmacokinetics is almost the inverse of that. It's describing what the body is doing to the drug and how it's being handled, again, how it's absorbed, distributed, metabolized, and eliminated. And you think about reptiles, we know very little about the disposition of those products, how it's absorbed and distributed, metabolized, and eliminated. So we had even a couple of experiments. A researcher and I at Ohio State were doing some of these pharmacokinetic studies of even anesthetic agents and green iguanas. And
Really?
so I suspect even Nate was probably doing his share of PK studies. But even if there was some funds to really better understand, again, these pharmacokinetics of different therapeutic products to support disease treatment in animals, particularly reptiles and lizards, because we still are guessing a lot of the times. That's even assuming you can find an exotics vet, that really has a good understanding of reptile medicine. I've struggled in that department, which kind of coming. You've heard me talk about high quality captive husbandry and care. There's a reason that I'm OCD, because I find that if you're providing really exemplary captive care and husbandry, you rarely have disease outbreaks or other pathologic conditions to tend with. And knock on wood, in over 35 years, I've had virtually no ill effects or disease in my collections, or animals that have really suffered any kind of adverse effects or pathology. And I've attributed that almost exclusively to just perfect captive care and husbandry. So sorry to sidetrack you there, Matt.
No, is that, and that's a good point, because they're so they've changed so little over so long. There's got to be something going on, right? That we should look into, and stuff. But
and we have all of there's a fairly sobering statistics. I'm not going to remember the source, so as a bad researcher, I'm going to give you a statistic and not be able to cite it. But we even Micah and I and Josiah, now we've done a lot of reptile husbandry training and even reptile medicine training for folks that are studying to be vet techs. Even I've had opportunity to even provide a little reptile husbandry and medicine training for veterinary students. And some students, like even students, a vet student in training at Ohio State University may get 2 or 3 hours of reptile medicine and 4 years of professional training. That's how little emphasis on some of the exotic species. But again, so you kind of come back to the husbandry standpoint, which is still sobering, and not to make this too sobering. They estimate still greater than 90% of store-bought reptiles will probably perish in their first year.
Wow.
In a captive environment. And that's because a lot of folks just aren't educating themselves and making a concerted effort to provide a suitable captive husbandry requirements that meet their natural their natural environmental conditions. And that is a tragedy, because, and this is something, that I'm a little bit on my soapbox on, because, when I was 10, 11, 12, 13, as I was described, probably maybe Paul Bodnar and others described the same thing. Certainly some of your other podcast guests, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have YouTube. We didn't have, social media and some of this, some of the technology that we obviously had. We had a handful of books, and I'd go to every library I could to just even see how many books they would have on reptiles. And as everyone in my generation probably knows, it was maybe 2 or 3. And we read them from front to back as many times as we could. But even that just barely scratched what we knew about reptiles, and certainly about their care. So now, when you consider the resources that we have, particularly if someone is buying a new snake or a new lizard, I mean, there's just an abundance of information on the internet to really educate yourself, equip yourself to be able to provide not just okay care, but to provide, exemplary care. Because in the right environment, some of these reptile species, particularly the snakes and the lizards we've described, are, they're in the 20 to 30 plus year lifespan or longevity category, and so that's quite a responsibility. The flip side of it is true though, where you folks buy a reptile, they buy an aquarium, and they put the snake or lizard in it and kind of throw food at it every week. That's probably an environment that is unfortunately conducive to disease and an early demise. So
I was just having this conversation with someone too, about how the reptile hobby has kind of increased and exploded in the recent years, and that's had like two main effects, one good and one bad. The good part is a lot more people are doing it, so more people are experimenting with it, essentially, and like finding better practices, and so better practices are going around, which is good. The bad part is it's kind of becoming like how dogs are, how people just buy a dog and have no idea how to take care of the dog, because there's a bunch of different types of dogs, and they all require different needs and stuff. And reptiles are the same except tenfold.
yeah,
And so people are, because of that, there's a lot of people just buying reptiles and they don't do the research into what it is and everything. And so you get that people that don't know how to properly take care of it, or the reptile isn't in the best conditions and stuff. Or you can get into, where people are getting like a Burmese python or some snake that gets really big and they don't have the proper facilities to take care of it and stuff. I was actually just at PetSmart not too long ago. I was picking something up. I don't remember what. And I always like to peruse at what reptiles they have and stuff. And they had a Savannah monitor for like $40 and stuff. And I'm like, that's not a really good, like, if you're going to PetSmart to get a reptile, you're a beginner, and that's not a very good beginner reptile pet, a Savannah monitor. I just didn't think that was, especially because, we know why Savannah monitors are only $40. But someone going to PetSmart to get in a reptile, they see a cool lizard like that for $40, they're going to pick it up, and I just think that's a bad idea.
yeah, and it probably it elicits an impulse purchase,
Exactly.
and versus a well researched informed purchase, so that you realize what the responsibility you'd be taking on. So it's that's human nature at its best, and there's a normal distribution of people. What I enjoy the most about this hobby, though, is individuals just like you both, and the Molds and Paul Bodnar and Zach and all the people that we've mentioned that really that even saying the word hobby is not really capturing kind of the true essence. I mean, it's something that we're passionate about, that we want to be successful at. That the care and the well-being of the animals is of the most critical importance to us, and that we also want to just educate others, so that they're not just so that okay or average is not the goal, but that exceptional care is the goal, and because ultimately that's a life that we're responsible for. And again, I don't do much breeding, or if I do, it's a bit calculated. Sometimes that is to just advance the hobby. So it might be corn snakes, which I do think in many instances do make a great kind of first time reptile species to work with. But in other cases, it might be species that fits a little bit more on the conservation side, where I do think if that my efforts might actually minimize some of the pressure on wild caught populations. So there's a little bit of a decision tree there for when I do consider what would be a good captive breeding project or not.
Yeah, like I mentioned to Matt before that I have a subadult pair of Maruki scrub pythons,
Yes. Yeah.
and I really want to breed those. A, because I think they're really cool, and
Yeah.
I don't really like them. But B, also because I noticed like almost like 95 to 99% of all scrub pythons in the U.S. are imports.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to change that around, and at least contribute a little bit to some captive breeding population in the U.S. a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also, everyone I talk to says that it looks like Fish and Wildlife might outright ban their importation in a few years. So,
yeah, it will be the whole industry will be interesting to see how it evolves over the next 5 to 10 years. I'm enjoying every minute of it while I can.
Yeah. I heard someone say that green tree pythons are going to be the next new wave ball python. So,
boy,
that should be interesting.
That'd be interesting to see. Yeah.
Speaking of Petco, actually, it's about a year and a half ago, maybe. I walked in and I saw they had a green tree python on sale there for $400, and I was like,
"Wow,
this is a Petco green tree python. I'm not going to get it because I don't want to have it die on me like 3 weeks later."
Yeah.
Yes, that would be. That's something I've never seen at a Petco. They're usually kind of consistent with the corn snake, leopard geckos, bearded dragons, and a few other odds and ends.
Chameleons sometimes.
Yeah.
Going off of like the impulse buy thing too. I know that could be hard. I talk to Nate about this all the time because whenever I see a reptile, like I get really excited. I'm like, oh, I want that. And then I always have to sit there and say, like, if I go to like a reptile show or something, I always have to bring someone with me that's not as into reptiles that can tell me, no, you shouldn't get, so I have to like always pause and like let my rational mind take back over and be like, all right, no, this is. And a funny story, we recently saw a place that was having like a sale on monitor lizards. And I was like, ooh, I really want one of those. And so me and Nate were talking about maybe splitting on a Mertens water monitor and stuff.
Yeah.
And I really want, and it was a monitor lizard on top of that. So I was like, I really want that and stuff. But I did some research into it and decided it wasn't a good idea and stuff. But yeah, that's how it can be tough with those impulse buys and stuff to like calm yourself, as you were saying before, let your rational mind take over and kind of stop you from doing something.
Yeah, I mean, being a little OCD has helped me in that regard because I'm definitely kind of researching, thinking about whether it's practical and usually coming to a sound conclusion. I mean, there'll be an occasional, like I did just recently. I keep adding to my list. And why I don't have a great explanation for why. I just thought, they were a good size and again, it kind of just brought me back maybe even to my childhood with one exception. But I got a trio of young 1.2 albino checkered garter snakes. And I just recently got those, and it was a little bit of a spur purchase, but I mean, the difference was that I know that I had, at least 2 racks that were completely empty. Not only, but so I know that I had the caging and the conditions required to care for them, and I could have it set up, in about 10 minutes each, if that. And I really have enjoyed them. I mean, they kind of get a minced meal of a little bit of pinky and earthworm and even a little tilapia, and it seems like they're doubling in size almost every week. Their lifespan is not nearly as long, but they've surprised me. I wasn't looking for them, but when I found them, I was guilty of a little bit of an impulse purchase.
Happens to all of us.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to impulse purchase something, garter snake's far away.
Exactly.
Far away from the worst ones to get.
There was no breaking of the bank. There was definitely no breaking of the bank. So you're right. If you're going to do an impulse, garter snake is, that's the easiest one to do. So, thank you. You made me feel better about myself, Nate.
Yeah. Yeah, but speaking of that whole monitor thing, one of the reasons I kind of backed out of that whole idea from Matt was at the same time I'd got in contact with the guy selling that diamond carpet.
Yeah.
So I was like, I mean, I'm not rolling in cash, so I'm kind of like, you know what?
Eh.
I think I'll go with the diamond carpet just because I don't know when another one's going to come up on the market at this price ever again,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
I think it kind of matches more my interests, and they're a lot easier to take care of, a lot less daily
Yeah.
routine
I mean,
stuff.
yeah, you definitely have to be good stewards of your funds. I will say, as as your income increases, the I've my wife has informed me so does the so a bit does the size of the hobby. So I think she was hoping I would grow out of it, like back even when we first, because we were high school sweethearts. I honestly think she felt, I was just this was a phase I was going to grow out
Yeah.
of, and now I think she realizes no, quite the opposite. And if anything, with increased income has probably been a direct correlation to the to my to the sophistication of the hobby. I mean, I try to buy good husbandry systems, good reliable thermostats, a little bit of automation and good just everything I want to to try to and so yes, even the value of some of the animals I bring into the collection has gone up. I'm still a little thrifty, so I've been at a few of the Tinley shows, and I think I've seen snakes even in the area of 45 to $60,000, maybe even occasionally higher. You think about the first, some of the first morphs that come out of in a ball pythons. Those sticker prices are definitely and higher than 50,000. That's never going to be me.
Yeah.
I'll wait. I'll wait until I'll wait a few years until the price point comes back because it's even hard for me to justify big spend, even for something I love.
The
Yeah, because I said this about myself, and I believe you believe the same way, Matt. But me personally, I'd rather keep like a more rarely kept species than the hyper expensive marked up morph of a commonly kept species. So
Yeah, I'm there, and that kind of even took me back to the comment that I made earlier. I'm even kind of going through kind of that soul searching phase of the hobby, and I'm empty nester. My kids have one. My daughter got married, and my son's in college. So, um, as my wife and I kind of even think about our pre-retirement plan, I think that'll still include reptiles, but it might include some travel, which might have me downsizing the collection a bit. And so I'm really starting to focus on what what maybe genus that I want to focus on specifically, or maybe it's even related to their environmental habitat and those conditions that I feel I can best satisfy or recreate, and in a basement in Central Ohio. So I'm kind of
gotcha.
going through that, but I do pretty well know that it's not going to be a ball python.
yeah. Yeah.
God love the ball python breeders. That market is well supplied and maybe even saturated, but that's just won't be me.
I was talking to Nate about this. I'm going in June. I'm going to the University of Queensland in Australia to get my master's degree. So
Awesome.
I've kind of downsized my collection and stuff. So I told him, I said, I kind of feel lame because all I have left right now is a ball python that I got for free and a leopard gecko that I got for free. So
Yes.
and then I have a tegu, but
Cool.
but I don't, because the legality. I live down here in Florida because the legality keeps like changing. It's changed like twice since being down here in Tegus. I don't tell people a lot on that. So when people ask me, so what kind of pets do you have? I feel lame when I tell them, oh, a ball python and a leopard gecko. They're probably sitting there like, oh yeah, this guy likes reptiles, sure. But
Yeah.
going off of what you said with the as the price goes, as your wage goes up, the
Yeah,
spending on the
your
I never
spending will
thought
go up.
I never thought about it, but when you said that, I was thinking about it. I do the same thing whenever, like, if I get like like if someone pays me, I don't know, like whatever for something, or like I get, I don't know, like tax refund, or I get a job that I get paid more. I noticed the first thing I look at is I go through looking at different reptiles that I could have as a pet or whatever. So
Yeah,
I do the
no,
same exact thing.
we kind of spend to our means. So there's
Right.
so yeah, that as your discretionary income goes up, so doesn't what you'll find your reptile budget will probably be going up at least that much. So
Yeah, I often say my parents are probably really irresponsible to not supervise me at a reptile expo when I'm making adult money.
yeah,
That's why I have to bring someone who's, not as into reptiles, so they can have a little bit more of a rational mind with like expos and stuff to tell me like, no, you shouldn't get that. That's not good.
yeah,
So
yeah. We actually even have the the All Ohio Reptile Show will be this Saturday, and so
Yeah,
I'll have some corn snakes, and Micah and I have even mentioned before. I mean, like corn, it's it's not about the value. I mean, if I find the right buyer, or the right enthusiast at the show, I think even there I might just give that corn snake away as a gift, particularly if I think it's someone that an individual on the far right of the distribution curve that we were describing that's going to be all in, that's going to be that I can tell has already been kind of researching and that I know that I'll have that peace of mind that that animal is going to be going into a captive environment that would be just as good, maybe even better than I could provide. Then that's like, yeah, no problem. Here you go. Enjoy your corn snake. Even if we do put a price on it, it'll probably be like $25 because I do know I've kind of referred to the corn snake even a couple of times as the gateway species for future reptile hobbyists, and so that's a good thing. I think there's I do want to bring in folks to the hobby and hopefully mentor them and coach them in ways that they end up doing even very good things for the hobby over their years.
yeah, when I was a kid, first getting into it, like me and my friend made like a list of like all the reptiles we want to keep, and of course it's like 1,000 different reptiles and stuff, and it's like Komodo dragons and
Yep.
stuff like that. And then as you guys were talking, as you get older, you kind of realize, okay, what kind of stuff do I really enjoy and kind of
Yeah.
going it down and stuff. But I just got a friend into keeping. He's more into frogs, but he's kind of going into reptiles as well and stuff. And he's going through the same phase. He's like, dude, there's so many ones I want to keep as a pet. He's listing all this stuff. I was like, dude, I know exactly what phase you're into, and trust me, you'll kind of get a niche of what you like and stuff. But it's fun to watch.
And there is, I mean, you're even because if I had to think that a species that's been on my bucket list for literally decades, um, and one of these days, it might be, like it's a caiman lizard, and so I'd really want though to have a first class display, and a
Yeah, for
semi-aquatic,
sure.
not an aquarium, but something that would be, almost the equivalent to a small room that you could really. And I'm not quite there yet, but who knows if I move. I'm even looking at whether it's time to snowbird and maybe live somewhere where it doesn't snow in the winter, or maybe even all year round. Maybe that's a better opportunity in the next move. We'll see. But Cayman lizard's definitely been on a bucket list for 30 plus years.
Me and Nate talked about that. Cayman lizards are such a cool lizard. Like if you can get a cool display, it's such a cool display animal.
Yeah.
yeah,
There's been a few zoologic parks. I can't remember which one. I think YouTube. I saw it on YouTube, and they just nailed it. I mean, they just nailed the exhibit. It might have even been Tennessee Aquarium or something. They poured into that display.
yeah. But going back to the top notch husbandry and stuff like that, I'm currently going through a phase of just trying to increase the size and quality of my enclosures as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really starting to enjoy it more and more because now I used to be kind of in the cult of the rack system, so to
Mm-hmm.
speak. I'm starting to switch back more to like vision cages and PVC enclosures, stuff like that.
Right.
And I'm enjoying it so much more because now I can see my animals again. I don't have to pull them out of a tub or something like that. I can see them just moving around, being natural.
Yeah.
And it's especially funny with my subadult female Maruki scrub. She has. At first, I thought she has a really bad personality, but now I just fall in love with her because every time I walk into my shed, first thing she does, she perks up and she literally comes all the way to the far side of the enclosure and starts just looking at me and just following me around everywhere movement I make. And at first I thought it was food, but I've fed her literally twice this week and she still just follows me around.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I'm with you on that as well. My caging is there are some racks, but then there's some also large PVC cages. Even I just graduated the false water cobras into large, more kind of terrestrial cages, but with large containers that they can soak in, and there's a balance there because even being in the industry that this as long as I have, sometimes there's this notion that reptiles and snakes need just enormous cages, and sometimes just the opposite is true. I mean, when I'm particularly working with someone and trying to understand, because probably like both of you, we get the frequently asked questions, and sometimes that's just why is my snake or lizard, why is it not thriving? It's not eating. It's just not doing well, and more often than not, I think I'll have found that the one of the reasons for an animal not eating is, well, it's always husbandry related, almost always husbandry
Mm-hmm.
related, and sometimes it's just that the cage is too big, and so it's to bring it to a smaller cage, put a smaller hide, not a hide that you could fit three of that snake under, but a hide that snake barely fits in, that its body is compressed up against the side. It feels secure. And I think that there is a lot to say about that because I'm an advocate of the natural, kind of the naturalistic um, uh, tanks and the full size tanks. But even there, I think you have to have copious hiding places. Otherwise, just the natural instincts of that animal. It's not an apex predator. It's still an animal that's probably preyed upon, and it's going to be feeling a bit insecure and maybe even a little bit in duress if it's in too large of an environment where it just doesn't or it even can't feel secure. So again, I do think there's a balance. There's some species that I work with that I just wouldn't put in a ginormous kind of a display environment because I think that it would not be a benefit to their well-being, their health and well-being. So, but there's others that I would. So I think a lot of that kind of goes back to just a knowledge of the species. This is something that even I'm remembering the reptile instructor. I think it was Dr. Scott Moody. He was at Ohio University, and he even evaluated some of the natural range of timber rattlesnakes and some other species down in Wayne National Forest. And you'd be surprised how little range some of these reptiles have in their natural environment. They're not they're not uh, traveling miles. Now that obviously there's some exceptions to that. There's almost always an exception to the rule, but yeah, I'm rambling a bit. I just still think again, if even I have an animal that is not feeding well, sometimes um, option number one is I will even put it in a slightly smaller enclosure just to make it have it feeling a little bit more secure. That's almost always gets the job done.
Yeah, I was actually just having this conversation with on yesterday. I was doing a kayak tour, and these ladies were asking about that because they said they were, I don't remember where they were, but these guys had these reptiles that they were showing, and they're in small cages. And she was like, why are they in such small cages and stuff? And I was and she was asking about like rack systems and stuff like that. And I was explaining to her, like um not all snakes, I mean, exactly what you just said, not all snakes need a lot of room and stuff. And so that was interesting. I like to hear different people's opinions on that because the hobby has really changed. um, right now at least is kind of morphing from racks and stuff. Not a
Oh
lot of
yeah.
people are doing racks anymore and stuff. So
Yeah, I mean, for all of us that listen to Brian Barczyk virtually every day, we see him going through that evolution as we speak. So
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah. And going with that the hide thing too. My ball python. People ask me like because they think the hide that I have for him is too small and stuff. And I've actually experimented with different size hides and stuff.
yes,
And if I use any larger of a hide than I have, he doesn't use it at all.
yep,
Um,
no, I agree. I mean, when I'm looking for a hide, I'm looking for a hide that that snake can barely fit into.
yeah, for sure.
That really feels secure in there. And again, even something as subtle as the size of that hide can be like an on life switch in terms of their kicking on their feeding response. So,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, notice that with the red mountain bows, I got like those cork bark tubes,
yep.
and like the male especially, he could barely fit in it, but he'll like go in, he'll double up and get there as tight as he can get. It's
Yeah.
like a it's like a wood
Swaddling
security
baby.
blanket for him.
Well, and that's, I mean, even you think about in the rare instance, fortunately, it's rare that we've ever had an escape in our collections or our facilities. It's none of those stories usually end that that you find them sitting right in the middle of the open room. They've usually jammed themselves in the tightest hole under the freezer, under a refrigerator, somewhere where you couldn't even imagine that they could have penetrated. But yet they found that spot, and so I mean, you even think about that situation. I think maybe one reptile escape in my life, and it was even a black tree monitor that I actually find it. Fortunately, I found everything, even usually within 24 hours. He was sitting right in front of the cage, waiting to go back in. I think he was ready to be fed. So that was lucky. Everything else has been, like finding a needle in a haystack. And
Yeah.
I'm usually looking for the tiniest little hole that they kind of might have could have slithered into.
That's one reason personally. I mean, I enjoy snakes and stuff, but I like to have lizards more as pets
Yeah.
because they're a bit more active.
Yep.
You can see them more, and I like that kind of thing. I'm also big into handling. I like to be able to handle.
Yep.
I don't have to handle things, but that's one thing that I really like is I like to handle things. So I'll pick and choose animals based on how
Yeah.
handleable they are.
We'll have to turn you on to the false water cobra, Matt. You may just like those. I mean, they are active, all
Yeah.
kinds of active, and they really do um, calm down. I mean, I've seen some real massive adults that I think they kind, I think mine are only not even quite 2 years old, so they're kind of going through that terrible two stage. Um, but once they get out, like once I bring them out of the cage, kind of get their mind off of food and just chilling a little bit, um, they're actually even two of the three are puppy dog tame, but that there's about 15 seconds. It feels about 3 minutes where they're just thinking about food and you're thinking about your fingers, and and once they get chilled out, they're fine. But you may actually enjoy those
I'll have to
thoroughly,
look into that.
especially if
Yeah,
you like a real active species, because they're on
for
the
sure.
move, they're diurnal. Um, yeah, they're very active, and even the yellowtail crebos are a lot like that too, but a little even more chill than the false water cobras for sure.
And you know what's funny about that too is whenever people hear that you're into reptiles, they automatically think snakes. And so people all the time think I'm like
Oh,
they call me like snake guy and they think I'm huge into snakes. And I really like snakes. I mean, it's lizards of all reptiles. It's lizard first, then snakes. But I'm more of a lizard guy, and it's
yeah,
just funny how like everyone
yeah.
automatically thinks you're a snake guy just because you like reptiles. You
And
know?
turtles, tortoises, again, I also a bucket list item. I now that I've finally seen how large they get as an adult, I don't know that they'll ever be on my checked off my bucket list. But is there anything cooler than a mata mata turtle?
Oh
I
yeah,
mean,
those are so cool.
absolute talk about evolutionary adaptation. I mean, there's just nothing more spectacular. But I honestly didn't appreciate how large they got until I finally saw a full size adult, and it was, it was snapper turtle, like alligator snapper turtle size. So I was like, forget that. That's not going to happen. I don't have the resources. So, but
I think it'd be neat to get a tortoise. I've thought about turtles in the past. They just, I mean, I like them. That I think they're cool. I've kept like ones I've caught for like a little bit and then let them go and stuff.
yeah,
They don't excite me as much as other stuff, but I think a
yeah,
tortoise would be really neat to have.
yeah. Redfoots
Yeah,
are kind of a cool. Even the eastern box turtle, kind of for native species, they're kind of cool. But definitely the redfoots. I couldn't handle anything that gets much bigger than a redfoot. Like the sulcatas.
yeah.
Great. You buy in their cute little golf ball size, and then again, if you'd research and see just how large they got, it'd be like, nope, no, thank you.
You're right.
And
Yeah.
and with a lifespan of I don't know, I think probably 100 years. No, I'm too old. I have to be able to
Right,
outlive my
right.
reptile. So
Me and Nate went and saw Ty Park's Iguana Land and saw his sulcatas. That was really cool.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
But I'm cursed with the desire to have crocodilians. So talk about
Yes.
size restrictions.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm gonna have to go back and listen to Paul's podcast. You've had a couple of podcasts which have been crocodilian focused. I'm gonna
Yeah.
have to even go back because they're definitely absolutely fascinating. But I just, like I said, I don't know that I'll ever, unless I move somewhere south where it's quite tropical all year and I could have some outdoor enclosures. I'm just not going to be there in a in an environment like Central Ohio. Just
yeah.
not, don't have that big of a house and don't have that patient of a wife, and so maybe I moved to somewhere more tropical might, maybe, but I don't know.
I really like it down here in Florida, and I've toyed with that in my mind that if I got to the point where I had a place and I had like a backyard with
Yep.
not a lot of people around, that'd be cool to have like a gator in the back and stuff. That'd be really neat. So
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
got to
And
worry
even
about
that,
the
even
legalities
that,
of it.
right,
as we know from, and even that's not without risk, as we know from Crutchfield's recent and experience, unfortunately,
right. Wait, what happened with that?
where he had, as I understand it, this is kind of third party, but that he had some outdoor enclosures that were uh, somewhere between terrorized and burglarized. He had some locks busted off, and
Really?
yep, and some of his collection was released, or stolen or something to that effect. So
That's crazy. There is. I'm not going to name the zoo because I don't know if they'd want this to be out, but they had some guy that was drunk go through and bust the glass on one of their. Um, I want to say it was a retic, but I could be wrong. And take one of the shards of glass and actually like attempt to kill the snake that was
oh,
in it.
that's terrible.
I know it's crazy.
Yeah, that's terrible.
One downside to having a place open to the public is you have to deal with the public.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, Matt, you have any other questions?
Actually, yeah, I do have another. I do have one other question. What got you into going into pharmaceuticals and stuff like that?
that's that's a good question. I'm not. It was quite, yeah, quite opportunistic, and maybe a little bit of fate, and probably a little bit of luck, and maybe a little bit of divine intervention, maybe a combination of all of those, because I wasn't even really sure that I wanted to go to college, and but right out of high school I was working in the Marion County road crew laying blacktop, and I think that was a job that made me think, maybe college is not as bad as I thought, and so I did get enrolled in college. As I mentioned, kind of did the undergraduate in zoology, and had really no interest at all. Didn't even think I was equipped, frankly, to be considering a PhD program. But I was doing. I was working for the division chair of pharmaceutical chemistry, Bill Hayton, at Ohio State University College of Pharmacy, and what was almost just as cool as reptiles is he did pharmaceutical research in finfish aquaculture. So, my graduate test species most days were channel catfish, rainbow trout, and some other freshwater fish that we would do um, different residue depletion of, different xenobiotic products. We would do the pharmacokinetic studies that I described, and our test species was different fish, and we were often looking at different products that might find their way into aquaculture farms, either in an approved way or in an unapproved illegal way. They might find their way into that pond and ultimately into the edible tissues of fish. And so we were really doing a lot of that research supported by the Center for Veterinary Medicine, FDA, to make sure that we were protecting human consumers of those finfish flesh. So I was, boy, I just went all over the place there, but so I was working for him, and I was honestly contemplating either getting a job, even in aquaculture, or at another, some other kind of facility where my undergraduate in zoology could kind of be applied. Or I was even thinking about being a high school science teacher, all of the above. And my boss, who happened to be this division chair, Bill Hayton, said, why don't you just come and pursue your PhD, and we'll pay for all of your education, and we even give you a stipend that'll help pay the bills. So I think honestly, the that was a door that opened that I never thought would open for my life, and I passed the IQ test, and and I signed up, and the rest is history. So I ended up finishing a great degree from a great university, and that has just kind of opened doors to all sorts of opportunities in the pharmaceutical industry. Companies like Biogen, Eli Lilly and Company, now on the contract research side of things with companies like Will Research that was acquired by Charles River, and the rest is history. But we are all of those companies were really focused on one thing, and that was helping to create healthier lives, and that has motivated me every day of my life, just trying to be uh, just trying to create impact and influence on others that hopefully make their journey a little sweeter. So that's kind of the long answer to that story, Matt. But it was maybe I suspect there was a fair bit of God involved in that one, because it wasn't my plan. It wasn't my plan to be doing a PhD. I don't even think I knew what that meant until I was in the PhD program.
Did you ever consider doing anything with reptiles? I know there probably weren't as many like opportunities or anything, but
I definitely did, and kind of still do a bit. At the time, definitely, if it existed, it wasn't aware to me. I didn't even know what I didn't know in terms of reptile opportunities. So I think this is like many fresh graduates, you're thinking about survival and
right.
paying the bills and paying for gas. And so I think that um, I if I considered it, I didn't consider it too much, because I just didn't think that there was going to be an opportunity out there for me that was going to
Pay
help
the bills and
help pay the bills. So life kind of intervened, and I went directly to the pharmaceutical route. And my first my first employer out of graduate school was Biogen, and they are still one of a preeminent biotechnology company that is probably most well known for their research in autoimmune disorders like multiple sclerosis. They are, I would say, a market leader in the care of patients for multiple sclerosis.
Yeah, well, it seemed to work out for you regardless. So
No, definitely no regrets. I've been blessed beyond my wildest imagination. So I've been definitely been blessed.
awesome. Well, that seems like a good spot to end there, unless Nate, you have anything else to say?
Nope, that'll be all.
Awesome.
Well,
Well,
yeah,
thank
appreciate you. Yeah, appreciate you guys both. And I was thinking when you said this could go an hour and a half, I think there was no way, but it actually went in like an hour and 40 minutes, and it was it was great fellowship. Appreciated talking with you both and talking about our shared passion and enjoyed the conversation and appreciate you both very much.
All right.
Awesome.
Well,
Yeah, thank you for coming on. We appreciate it.
thank you.
Okay, have a good one, guys. Have a great
Yeah, you
night.
too.
Bye now.